The cowardice and total lack of judgment of former vice president and current contender for the Republican nomination in the 2024 election, Mike Pence, was on full display in a recent interview with CNN. Intrigued? Then click that like, subscribe, and the alert bell, and enjoy the video. So as I've made abundantly clear in multiple videos on this channel, I have no respect for Mike Pence, and I'm really not interested in pretending that I have any respect for Mike Pence, Donald Trump's former vice president and his current rival, one of many, for the 2024 Republican nomination. And a lot of people, some Republicans and virtually every Democratic official, have paid lip service to the idea that Mike Pence is a hero because he resisted Donald Trump's efforts to try to single-handedly overturn the election on January 6, 2021. Now, I understand politically, optically, why that has its uses, right? And at the end of the day, politics is a bit of a cynical business, so I don't begrudge Democrats who feel that they can weaponize Mike Pence in that respect. And so if they laud him or compliment him in strategic ways, I'm fine with that. And I felt the same way about Democrats saying nice things about Liz Cheney and Adam Kinzinger, two other former Republican congresspeople who were also critics of Trump at the very end. Now, again, personally, I don't think they're heroes. I think they demonstrated an obscene lack of judgment over time that most people who were paying attention to Donald Trump all the way back in 2015 would have been able to see relatively early on, and Mike Pence is no exception. So he did an interview with CNN, with Kaitlan Collins on CNN. She's racking up some pretty good interviews, probably to vindicate herself from the performance in the Donald Trump town hall. Although, to be fair to her, it's really hard to fact-check a pathological liar like Donald Trump, even in a town hall setting, right? We saw Chris Wallace struggle to do it, and Chris Wallace is one of the GOATs during the 2020 debate with Biden. But anyway, so Mike Pence does this interview with Kaitlan Collins, and we're going to play about 3 minutes of it. It's a relatively long clip. But to me, this demonstrates that this man truly is a coward and that he has an alarming lack of judgment if you take his words at face value. So take it away, Mr. Former Vice President.
I can honestly tell you, I know it's of great interest to many of you in the media, but it's just not what people were talking to me about on the ground in Iowa or when I've been in New Hampshire and other states around the country,
Mr. Vice President,
or even here in Indiana.
One voter actually did bring it up to you. She was of the belief that you were essentially the reason President Biden was in office. You corrected her and said you did not have the authority to overturn the election that day. You didn't have the ability not to certify Biden's win. You just said that you believe the American people will hold Trump accountable. You have said that you do ultimately believe he'll be held accountable for that day. Does that mean you say that he'll be held accountable by the voters, not by the criminal justice system here?
So just to clarify again, Kaitlan Collins is referencing a recent exchange between Mike Pence and a Republican voter, a woman in Iowa, and we actually did a video about it. And she's a full-on Cult 45 card-carrying member. She's a Trump-deluded fanatic, and she blames Mike Pence for not defying the Constitution, defying all reason, and trying to single-handedly overturn the election for Donald Trump's favor. And, of course, they're referring to January 6th. That's the context of this. So Mike Pence, of course, begins the interview downplaying, oh, people don't care about January 6th anymore, which unfortunately probably has quite a bit of truth to it, particularly within the Republican Party. But the reason he's trying to downplay it is because it's such a black eye. It's a pockmark on the Trump administration and, to some extent, even Mike Pence himself. But let's hear what he has to say.
Sure.
Well, I'm just saying that's what I would prefer in this case. But look, I respect the rule of law, Kaitlan. I mean, you know where I stand on the Constitution. You know where I stand on the rule of law, and I want to let our judicial process work, and I want to be respectful of that. But at the end of the day, I trust the American people in this matter, and it would just be my hope that ultimately questions around that fateful day would go to the American people. And I got to tell you, you're right. There was one person that brought up the events of January 6th and my actions that day, but just.
So even right there, folks, I mean, you see how he's trying to downplay it. Okay, fine, yeah, somebody brought it up, and it was a viral moment. It went everywhere, all over the internet. Everybody was talking about it, but you're right. Okay, fine, somebody brought it up. He's still trying to basically straddle both worlds. This is the issue with Mike Pence and every other non-Trump rival or candidate for the Republican nominations, because Chris Christie is the only one who's willing to tackle Trump head on, metaphorically speaking. Now, it's not doing him any favors, but they're kind of mealy-mouthed milquetoast. We're hinting that Trump isn't fit for office, but we don't have the stones to come out and say it. This approach isn't working either. And even right there in his answer where he's talking about, I'd prefer the voters vote him out, but I also believe in law and order. So I would prefer that he not be charged and voters vote him out, but I also want him to be charged because I respect law and order, and apparently, federal prosecutors can make an indictable case against it. It's absolute, it's vapidity. He's totally vapid. He's not saying anything at all. But anyway, let's continue.
We did 12 town halls in 10 counties, and I have to just tell you, I was frankly grateful that she brought it up. I think there's been some misunderstanding that persists to this day. And President Trump has continued to maintain that I had the authority to overturn the election, but I had no right to overturn the election. And I know that by God's grace, we did our duty under the Constitution on January 6th. And but honestly, Kaitlan, it just didn't come up as we traveled around, because frankly, the failed policies of the Biden administration have weakened this country at home and abroad. The American people are desperate.
So again, there's probably some truth to that, right? The public consciousness, in the sense that, we have a very short attention span as a people. Some of it's understandable, a lot of it isn't. And January 6th should be, if we were civic-minded at all as a population, it would be seared indelibly into our brains, because it was the first time that a sitting chief executive, a sitting president of the United States, the one person, the one office in whom we vest the most power and the most responsibility, broke a 230-year tradition of the peaceful transfer of power, which is the most important single tradition, civic tradition in this country's political history. It was the one that the founding fathers, if you beatify them and lionize them, if you think that they're these infallible, titans of judgment, if that's your perspective, then you should think, what the hell would they be thinking if they thought, hey, you'd have a sitting president who would fight tooth and nail after the results of an election to, keep from leaving office? They would be appalled, right? So it's just that January 6th should matter. It should matter a great deal, probably much more than it does. But of course, he has to pivot to the Biden administration, who is an administration which is vastly superior by legislative and executive benchmarks than the Trump administration ever was. Let's continue.
Desperately concerned about those issues affecting their lives.
I understand that you're saying voters didn't bring it up.
They're not really looking in the rearview mirror, and that's where I'm staying focused too.
I understand that you're saying it's not something that gets brought up a lot by Republican primary voters, but when you talk about your actions on that day, you're often praised for the actions you took that day, standing up to the pressure you were facing to take actions that you say you could not take, that everyone says you didn't have the ability to do. But do you ever wish that you had spoken up sooner, that you had come out and publicly conceded the election in the weeks before it got to the point that it got?
This is the question, folks. This is the ultimate question. Let's hear how he handles it.
That you had said something before then?
Well, honestly, Kaitlan, I had frankly hoped all the way up to the waning days before January 6th that President Trump would come around on this issue. I'd seen it many times. You talk about times that we disagreed when I was vice president. I'd seen the president take a hard position on an issue and then take the opposite position and then engage in a debate back and forth. And I'll never forget that Monday night right before January 6th when he stood before a crowd in Georgia at a rally. And I had been in Georgia earlier in the day rallying folks for that special Senate election. And I remember he said, Mike Pence has got to come through for us, and if he doesn't, I won't like him so much. And then he paused and said, no, one thing you know about Mike is he's always going to do the right thing. And I remember in that moment, Kaitlan, thinking, maybe he's coming around and starting to see that the people that had told him that I had some authority that the Constitution simply did not give me, nor should ever give to any one individual. The presidency belongs to the American people and the American people alone.
So that's a beautiful sentiment, that part at the end, and that's certainly more incisive constitutional analysis that you would get from most Trumpers. But we spent most of this video discussing Mike Pence's cowardice and how he's trying to deflect from January 6th. But that last part at the end, that last question that she asked him, which every reporter should always ask Mike Pence, okay, you can't control Donald Trump. He was your boss. He was the president. But you could have said things. You had a bully pulpit. You had access to the press when you were the vice president of the United States, and you had months to directly contravene Donald Trump when he was denying the results of the election, and you didn't. Don't you regret not saying something sooner and conceding? Now, it would have been historically anomalous, right? You typically don't expect, a vice president. It's usually the president who concedes if he loses an election, not the vice president. But in these extraordinary circumstances, why didn't you do it? And so then he displays his total lack of judgment. If what he says is to be taken at face value, if he means what he says, which is that he genuinely thought Donald Trump might come around, he's an idiot. He's an idiot. All evidence indicates to the contrary, that Donald Trump is a malignant narcissist and arguably a sociopath and a pathological liar. There's no evidence that this man is willing to change. anything's possible, right? There could be unicorns dancing on the tap dancing on the rings of Saturn. Highly unlikely, though, right? It's the same thing with Trump. If you genuinely expect that a 76-year-old malignant narcissist, pathological liar, sociopath was going to change his mind about the most public defeat, the most publicly embarrassing, humiliating defeat he'd ever suffered in his life, if you thought he was going to come around by that and you were willing to bank the civic tapestry that is the United States by just keeping your mouth shut and just hoping that he would come around, you do not have the judgment or the temperament to run for the highest office in the land. So this interview is disqualifying, in my opinion.